Welcome to the last episode of Getting Started with Game Creator. In this video, we'll cover variables. A variable is nothing more than a data container identified by a name which can store a value. For example, the health of the player could be a variable with health as its name and a numeric value of 100. A variable can store different types of values, including strings, numbers, booleans, and game objects. Variables are split in three different categories: global variables, local variables, and list variables. Let's start with the simplest: global variables. Global variables are not bound to any game object, and their values can be accessed from any scene. To create a global variable, open the Preferences window and select the Variables tab. Type the name that will identify the variable. For example, health. Press Enter and we can see that the new element has appeared. Set its type as number and its value to 100. Most Game Creator actions support using variables as input or output. For this particular case, we'll use the text action, which will change the value of a Unity text with our global variable. Here we have a simple scene with a Unity canvas and a text component. We'll add a new actions component below and the change text action. Under the variable field, we'll select our health global variable. Let's click play and see that. When we execute the actions, the text value changes to 100. Having covered how global variables work, let's now see local variables. These are very similar to the previous one, but they are attached to game objects and their scope is limited to the scene they are in. We'll change the previous action and use a local variable instead. Create a local variable, setting its type as number and 50 as the initial value. Select the actions that contain the change text instruction and change the global variable option to local variable. A local variable needs a variable name as well as the game object that contains it. Drag and drop the local variable to its field and search for the local health variable. That's it. If we hit play, we can see how executing the action changes the text content with the value 50. List variables work very differently from the other two. They are also attached to game objects, but each variable is identified by its position in the list instead of by its name. We'll show how to use list variables using another example. Let's create a list variables by clicking the green button in the toolbar with 3 white stripes. Click on the plus sign 3 times to create 3 variables. Let's also create 3 cubes and assign them to each variable. We'll create an actions component below the list variables. We want this action to destroy the first object on the list variables. To do so, we use the destroy action and set the target as a list variable, dragging that object onto its field. As we can see, Game Creator allows to access a list variable element via different selectors. We'll use the first selector, which picks the element at the top of the list variables. But destroying the first element won't destroy the item in the list variables, but make it reference a null object. So we also want to remove the first element of the list variables. Luckily, there's an action that does that, called remove from list variables. Let's set it up to reference the list variables and destroy the first element. Let's click play and see how, every time we execute the action, a cube is destroyed and the first variable is removed from the list. You can learn more about Game Creator and the rest of the modules visiting the documentation linked in the description, as well as watching other videos in our YouTube channel.